I've been excited to get up here, like most of you. I've been in the room for the last 2 days and envious of the people going outside, but hopefully this is going to be really helpful for you. Like was introduced, is your batch record truly complete? What I've seen is lots of confusion as I've tried to figure out what vendors are saying about having a batch record. Sometimes they're partial, and if you have a partial batch record, then you get partial benefits. And so what I'd like to do is take all of you through what I see from this perspective of what is a complete batch record. First, why MasterControl and who are we? First, my name is Curran. Been with MasterControl for almost 20 years. You may have known us as a quality management provider. We've been doing that for a very long time. The FDA actually uses MasterControl as its quality management system. We recognized about 5 years ago, though, that there was this huge opportunity in the manufacturing space, specifically with batch records. And so 2.5 years ago, we launched an EBR system, and we now have over 100 customers using the EBR system, and those customers have completed over 300,000 batch records. So as what's been talked about much of the day, much of the session is, well, what is an MES and is it changing? My response to, yes, the future MES isn't here today. It was introduced a couple years ago, but you're seeing lots of different vendors coming into the space. And the first thing I want to share is something that was also mentioned yesterday. 80% of life sciences manufacturing, pharma manufacturing is still paper-based. We see that as a vendor through our own lens. But what I wanted to walk you through is why is that paper and what we see. So the graphic is each one of those hexagons represents 1% of pharma manufacturing capacity. And all of the empty cells means that's paper-based. And what you see on top, that's been the legacy MES vendors that have been tackling and providing EBR for a while. But what most people jump to the conclusion of is, well, it's the big companies at the top that have implemented MES and automation systems, and it's all the small companies that haven't. Our experience is it's the high volume lines. So even within large companies, the highest volume lines will have implemented, but not every site and every other line. So we're seeing more and more RFPs from large tier pharma saying, I've got an MES, I've got 2 MESs, but I've got 18 sites that are on paper. I've got 50 sites that are on paper. This is what we created. This is the gap. As a consumer of some pharmaceuticals and as a family member and society in general, we all know the perils of paper. Having 80% of our manufacturing capacity, to me, is almost irresponsible when they're using paper. The quality problems, data integrity problems, et cetera. So as an industry, vendors, customers, et cetera, I think we need to flip that so that the vast majority is automated and has gotten rid of the paper. That's really what we're hoping to do. So examples of incomplete or partial batch record systems, and I'll walk you through some illustrations. So this is a hypothetical production line, very oversimplified. It has 6 processes, if you will. It's a GMP facility, you can see, and if anything, it doesn't have enough people. We should have some more people up there in between the stations. But it's just, take it as an example. Maybe it's a bioreactor on the left and packaging on the right. There's this thing called islands of automation. More and more vendors are coming out and consolidating multiple processes within the production process, particularly cell and gene therapy. And when I read their documentation, what I often see is it provides an electronic batch record. Well, it's really an island of automation accurately because only the second step is automated. And there's usually intelligence in that system that emits data that could be part of or attached to a batch record. But steps 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are totally paper-based. And what's really intriguing about this to me is even though that island of automation has a lot of intelligence, at the end of the process, the customer is responsible for a batch record. And so their choice is, well, how do I merge the digital plus the paper? And when the digital is 16% of the entire production process. What they end up doing more often than not is printing the digital stuff from phase 2 so that they have a complete batch record. That's one example of what we could call, a modern or evolving MES. There's also another approach. This is called the app approach. And in the app approach, one of the great benefits is that you can zero in on and target a specific production process. You don't have to implement, as we've seen in case studies, you don't have to implement and take 16 to 24 months to do the entire production process for one line. You can build an app very quickly. But the net effect in the context of the batch record is very similar. The bulk of the production process is still paper. The app might emit some digital, but then the customer is still responsible for pulling all of that together. And similarly, often the customer is responsible, ends up printing steps 1 and 6. And little things, when you think about building the batch record and looking at that, little things like, well, maybe you've digitized the first and last step, but between those, how do you take the output of those and combine them just so the page numbers match with steps 2 through 5? So there's a lot of complexities. There are benefits, and this is an evolving part of the, I think, ecosystem. Maybe the MES should be an ecosystem and not just a single piece of software. But there are challenges when you think about it from the batch record context. So the legacy MES, as was illustrated this morning, with a legacy MES approach, you can have a complete batch record. The entire process using PCs, and I'm using that to kind of connote it as a historical. The entire process can be automated if you can afford it and you have enough time to do that, and you have the right type of production process. What happens more often than not, though, is that only works on the highest volume lines. So within a same company, even though they have a legacy MES, another line won't have it. So that's a paper-based line. So do they really have a complete EBR? Well, it's partial in the context of all of their production capacity. And as many of you probably experience, there's more than one. So all of the other lines, one of 18 or one of 52, is automated and does have an EBR, but the rest of them don't. That's why we have 80% of life sciences manufacturing capacity is still paper-based, or a contributing reason. What is the desire? What is the desired outcome? We should have way less paper and way more automated EBRs. And this is a complete EBR, modern, purpose-built to be, and maybe it should be positioned as a EBR service. So we talked about components and services and things like that. But that's effectively what we've built. It's using tablets so that it's communicating. It's a modern system, natural interfaces. And you also can see the dark line connecting the phases. That's intended to apply the complete digital thread. So in the absence of, you don't have paper interjections in between the automation. It is the entire production process and all the people's interactions that's been automated. So how can you tell if you have a complete system, or how can you tell if you're looking at implementing a system that it provides a complete EBR? There's 6 criteria, 6 factors that I wanted to share. The electronic document, the GDP process, the review conundrum, the volume of products, which we have not mentioned a lot yesterday and today, validation, which we have talked about, and so I will talk about that very small amount, and then last one is the data. So the electronic document, our customers across those 100, typically 25 to 50 page document, often hundreds of pages. Our largest batch records are over 1,000 pages, and we have a handful of customers in that. So it's a really big document when you start looking at it. And there are some considerations. I should go back. Is a batch record a document, a collection of pages, or is it a collection of fields, data elements? And instead of using the word or, I'll replace that with and. The best batch record is both a document and a collection of data. And I'll explain that as we go through this. So thinking about it as a template, Think about it as doc control. We've got the MBR, which we call the master template. What do you want to do with that? As a document, you want to do the same thing that you do with all of your other documents. You want to make sure that it can be sent for an approval route. It can be collaborated on. When it's approved and finalized, you want to have watermarks and a signature manifest. You want to make sure you have the proper version and revision control on each of the MBRs that your company has. As a solution provider, we want to make sure that our customers have those capabilities, and it's not just something, oh, here's a program, or here's an app, and then you send it somewhere else. The ideal solution has all of that built into it. And then thinking about the batch record, it needs to be an auditable, legible, usable. So one of our design thoughts going into this was, it is a document. At the end of the process, it needs to be familiar to the operators and familiar to everybody else who's going to present that to the FDA 2 years from now, or whoever the regulatory body is. It needs to be easy to use and easy to share. So I mentioned page numbering. There's a lot of factors when you start thinking about a 100 or 500 page document. Page numbering, making sure you have that right. That's what people do today, and that's why one of the reasons why it takes so much manual labor with the paper-based batch record. You have to coalesce. I call it a 3-ring binder exercise. You have to get everything right, and that takes time. You also have advanced capabilities that you would like to have as part of this document. Redaction. So as you're sharing this batch record, maybe with your suppliers or contract manufacturers or whoever you're sharing it with, you want to have some of these capabilities that are built in to that document, not just it's a PDF and you send the same document to everybody. In the end, you want your document to be purpose-built, knowing what some of the requirements are. And this slide, it's customer involvement. So we have several contract manufacturers have a strong propensity to use an EBR system like ours. And one of the things they really like to do, they view it as a competitive advantage as they're working with their clients to get their business. It's a competitive advantage that they have an electronic system that not only is electronic, digitized, but that they can collaborate on and review and approve. The customer gets to participate. The GDP process, I've got a diagram here of what I think software should be in general, and manufacturing software definitely fits into this category, and that it's a guidance system. So this is a picture of a car backing out of a spot. The sensors are detecting possible problems, in this case an oncoming vehicle from the left, and a warning is triggered, or if it's really bad, more than a warning, the brakes are applied. We should have the same kind of process in our software. And I'll explain a couple examples. GDP process. The GDP process itself, for people that have been in the industry for a while, it's not really that big of a deal. But for a new operator coming into an environment, the left side is just a quick review of the GDP process that I pulled off of Google. The right side is an example of the gobbledygook that could happen. And it's just one table, and so I layered that to say, remember, we're talking about a batch record that could be 100 or 500 pages that has to be reviewed line by line, page by page. So what is the GDP process? How quickly can my operators get up to speed? With a guidance system, it shouldn't be as big of a deal as compared to when you're using a paper-based system and you're trying to train them and teach them. And we all recognize that because it's a bad enough problem, we have to have many more people. When you have humans, they create human errors, and so how do we resolve that? We throw more humans at it. It's not a great solution, but that's what we have to do. We have to have more humans do the reviews. So what the guidance system should do is just guide the operators through the work instructions using the proper techniques. They really don't have to think about things like what color ink and how do I initial and where do I initial. We should do more than that, though. We should enforce numeric limits and thresholds, and we're familiar with that and those general capabilities. But more than making it legible, we want to make sure that the data is accurate and precise. Connecting it to a system, I mentioned we did a quality management system. One of the things you do at the end of the review process, and you hope you have it correct 2 years from now when you have to present this to an auditor, is did every operator have their training completed well, that's a complicated thing for somebody to work on when the action took place 2 weeks ago. Maybe that operator isn't here in this shift or on site right now. The software should prevent that from ever happening. By connecting the MES or the MX system with the QMS system, if an operator doesn't have the right training, we should prevent that from happening. And it's one of those outcome bases. We should prevent the vehicle from running into an oncoming vehicle. Navigating corrections, signatures using GDP. Down here is just a screenshot that it becomes very simple and straightforward. This is what we call a corrections play-by-play. If you want to see the details of who corrected what and when, you can. You explode it. If you don't want to see that messiness, then you just collapse it, and it would appear on the printed batch record. And then more opportunities to connect and provide guidance. Deviations was mentioned at least 20 times yesterday. If there are open deviations on the step that the operator is working on, maybe that we should inform them. What are those open deviations? And they can, before we even take a corrective action, the operator may have the information to know how to improve their job that they're doing today. The review conundrum. Review by exception. Talked already a little bit about line by line, page by page. Ideally, in the circular graph here, we have banker's boxes. All of that just is representing the volume of review that has to be done. Reviewing by exception should be able to look like what steps were corrected, what deviations were launched, what attachments, what numeric limits were exceeded. All of that information changes our customers. So you can go to our website and get case studies. But examples that I use are the review process changes from weeks to hours. Our most egregious review improvement, the customer took over 100 days on average to review a large batch. They wanted to get it down to 28 days. That was their goal. It's in hours now. That's the exception, but most instances, the review process is a week or more, and it's reduced to an hour. If you only have a partial system, in terms of digitizing, if steps 2 through 5 are still paper, and your step 1, if you're using an island of automation, has to be printed out, you may be able to get partial review by exception benefits on the first step. Or you really don't get much benefit at all. You really need a complete system to yield a complete review by exception process and gain the benefits that I just described are possible. This was mentioned a little bit yesterday. Parameterization, the volume of products. Often when we talk about batch records, we think about a singular product, a singular workflow. Very few companies have that. And so how do you handle the volume of products? I think another reason why 80% of the life sciences manufacturing is still paper is the challenge or the difficulty of saying, okay, I can get one done, but how do I get all of my products? How do I get thousands of SKUs into an EBR system? And the note there is our customers using our tools have seen as much as 100 to 1 MBR reduction, which is significant. So one of the challenges, if you've got, call it 1,000 templates, those 1,000 templates have been created over the last 15 years, as an example. And we're asking a customer, go replicate those 1,000 templates that have taken 15 years and go digital in months. That's a tall order. It's possible if you do 100 to 1 MBR reduction. It's really daunting if you make them think that they have to do 1,000 conversions from paper to digital. So how do we do that? Scalable templates, global elements. Also mentioned yesterday, we're applying a lot of software principles that make a lot of sense in the software world and make perfect sense when we're applying it to this problem as well. Product families, sometimes called recipes, formulations. These are all tools that will enable the customers, even if they do a 25 to 1 reduction, it's a huge improvement and allows them to get more of their production capacity digitized. The other thing I haven't mentioned yet, this would be a good time to do it. So validation challenge. It was mentioned yesterday that more and more tools that have been applied in other industries are going to come into the life sciences industry. I saw a report, a sales process report from a customer who the consultant was trying to convince them, don't worry about validation, this software is completely validated and you don't have to do anything. If you've been in the life sciences industry, you know that's a huge red flag. If you're new, you don't really know, and so you're going to end up trusting, and that will become a huge red flag. Not going into any of the bullets here, but in 20 years ago when I started with MasterControl, Documentum, you would plan to spend 3 times as much on the validation as you would do on the software. And over the years, that's been transitioned. We've improved the validation process, validation tools, et cetera. I was delighted to hear about the automation effort because that's something one of the things we're building. We have a lot of patented tools to decrease the validation, but life sciences pharma companies should be just like any other company in terms of adopting software. We shouldn't have this burden or this penalty. And so one of the tools we're working on also is going to be an automation tool generator. So everything that was described this morning where they created testing tools, we're going to have a tool that reads your batch record, reads our customer's batch record, and automatically generates those tools. Further reducing, really we want to focus on improving processes, and the validation should be in the background. As part of that, one of the things I failed to mention in the introduction, our fastest customer has gone live in 32 days. Their first batch record was created and went live in 32 days. On average, well, I have alerts set up for those 100 customers. If they're not live in 6 months, then I get an alert, and I know we try to marshal some resources and help them. Typically, we want to do it in 3 to 4 months, have them go live. So the batch record data and visibility, also mentioned yesterday, was the continuous improvement. In the absence of having digitized, in the proliferation of paper, where's all the data? All the data is with the batch record in the banker's box. And so a partial system, if you're only digitizing part of your production process, you only get partial benefits of that data. You do get some island automation benefits, and whatever portion that you do automate, you'll get some data from it. But if we're thinking about continuous improvement in the context of the batch record, then the continuous improvement data should inform us about the entire release process and every interaction. The average number of data collections in our batch records from our customers is 300. So 300 data elements that could be reviewed and improved on if it was digitized. A partial system also provides partial visibility. So particularly during the pandemic, the benefits of being digital and being able to see what's happening remotely. When I order a $20 pizza, I know when it goes into the oven and when it's going to be ready. But when our customers, and when all of you are dealing with $1 million batch, do you know when it's going to be ready? What part of the process it is? And there's continuous examples that I see in our own lives, personal lives. Our operators are carrying mini computers, and so they're very familiar. So from an adoption perspective, we were worried about this when we rolled it out, but our experience is the operators that don't have the system, if it's not been rolled out to their line yet, they're clamoring. They want the technology because they don't want to deal with the GDP and the paper, et cetera. So the point here is if you get a complete system, it also will yield complete data and the visibility, and the data showing the science. There's also, using a personal example, Apple Watch, Peloton. I want to do better than I did yesterday as an individual or the last ride. And I want to know, if you think about it like from a Moneyball movie, it's like, which team is doing better? Which site is doing better? Do I have the data to know whether I have the golden batch? How do I improve my overall efficiency? You need the data, and then things will happen. You'll be able to see, and you'll be able to make some observations and make some improvements. But as long as it's on paper, and as long as 80% of our life sciences manufacturing is paper, we don't get these benefits. even as consumers. So we're relying on the manufacturers to make sure that the quality is right of whatever gets embedded in me and whatever I consume, as well as my family. So, conclusion, the complete batch record system should be purpose-built to provide templates. It acts like a document. It should be a guidance system. You should have review by exception on the entire process, not just part of the process. It needs to be able to handle more than one batch record, more than one workflow, and be delivered quickly. Validation is a given, and the benefits, data and transparency for the entire process. With that, you can attain some business outcomes. Also mentioned this morning, we're in this for business, 30% reduction in total deviations. We provided quality management software for 20 years, and we help our customers more efficiently manage the deviation. Wouldn't it be better to reduce the number that have to be handled? Lots of great stories from our customers that have experienced they have fewer deviations to handle. 30% increase in resource efficiency. A lot of times people will look at this on the negative side and say, oh, I can do more with less people. What people am I going to get rid of? We see this more in growth opportunities. I can scale my organization knowing I'm digital and because it's more efficient. 80% acceleration of the GMP record review, weeks to hours, and 90% decrease in data input errors. That's the whole human thing. Humans generate more human errors that have to be monitored and checked by humans. And customers that track this, it's kind of painstaking to track and demoralizing in my opinion. So the ones that do track this have reported more than a 90% decrease in data input errors. That's it. Q&A. Thank you for everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian. Questions for Brian?
So my first question is, can you let us know what are the tools you used for validation? And the second question is, you said that for the deviations, you help the parsing the data or to help minimize the efforts you put to deal with the deviation. So how do you do that?
Great question, thank you. So the validation tools, way back when, it was just creating and doing more vendor-based transfer OQ. So instead, 20 years ago, every customer had to do their own IQ, OQ, PQ. So the early stages was just doing a vendor-based OQ. More recently, we have this tool called Validation Excellence Technology, VXT. It is a risk-based tool. It comes from the vendor. It tells you what changed in a given release. And then you can map to that, well, do I use that feature or not? And then it helps you create a risk-based score that instead of saying, these are all the changes, I have to go validate everything, you can say, these are the changes that happened because the software vendor told me. These are the ones that I use. These are the ones that are my risky areas. Here's my validation. It's a smaller portion. And then ultimately, we want to build automated tools. So you'll see more of that coming up later this year. In terms of the deviations, there's two parts. There's planned deviations, unplanned deviations. Most of the unplanned deviations from our customers that we see are human error generated. And so by using the power of the computer, we can prevent most of those from happening. The planned deviations is more about what deviations are in place when the production process starts, and how can I inform my operators about those before actually implementing a change and going through and updating my work instructions, et cetera. So that's more of an assistive. It's kind of like assisted cruise control. And the other one is just automating the driving and doing all the sensors and notifications so that they don't have as many human-generated errors creating the deviations. Other questions?
Yeah, there was one guy.
Hi, my name is Sunil. I'm from Sanofi. As you said, there are a lot of challenges for GDP's documentation and all those things, right? So the main concern is missing entries, right? Suppose if you have a start time for the process, end time for the process, right? I mean, even in manual documentation, if you miss any entry, you have opportunity to go back and make entry with some notes or with some secondary verification. So how do you deal in EBR system those missing entries? Suppose if you found at the time of QA review someone has really missed the critical entry, that will definitely going to lead deviation. So is there anything there can be done?
So let me make sure I understand the question. It sounds like paper-based or electronic. During the production process, there are challenges sometimes when things are missed, and how do we handle those? Through predecessors and dependency mechanisms and automating the workflow, we increase the probability you won't miss those. In a paper-based system, here's my paper-based batch record. Don't separate it. What really happens? Here you do yours, here you do yours, here you do yours. And then when you pull it back together, it's challenging, just like any chasing the folder problem would be. It's challenging or it's easy that something might not be done. In an automated system, I didn't show any screenshots, but you can't get to step 3 if you haven't done step 2. And so you can build in dependencies like that. We do have another way of answering the question is sometimes you go through the production process and the step wasn't missed, but there are things discovered that we should go back and re-review, and can we change the data? And so as long as the batch record hasn't been released, then you can still go back and make corrections or notes or whatever that case may. Whatever you find during the review process, you may have to go back and make some adjustments to the batch record.
So basically you can go back and make re-entries.
You can make corrections. Yep, and
Put some notes maybe.
put some notes, but you cannot change the data that was captured. So all the FDA rules that we've been accustomed to, there is no delete, there is no erase. You have to make sure that you do it in a proper way so the original entries were still preserved.
You heard any other challenges from customers from your experience? Yes.
Any challenges from customers? Absolutely. Budget, priorities, which one, does my ERP get installed before this? So I would say a lot of that is project-based, and I think we've heard that in the case studies. How do I get my management to buy off on it? I would say one of the largest challenges we see, though, is just a general lack of awareness, meaning customers don't know that the apps and the islands of automation and the EBR systems are available. And so how do we, and the MES term is a pro and a con. We've gone into situations where we've had executives say, I'm not doing that MES EBR thing again. It costs me way too much, it's too long. And so changing the mindset, I think, is one of the biggest challenges. And if you look at our software as kind of disrupting, meaning if we've sold 100 customers in 2.5 years and we can implement in 30 to 60 days, the mindset across the larger part of the industry is still, it takes 18 months, it takes $1 million starting entry point price. It's like, we don't want to do that. We can't afford it on our other lines. So awareness, I think, is a big challenge.
And a quick one to that added. Will it always, I hear 80-20, I hear 70-30% of folks on MES, and maybe more applied to large pharma. But don't you think there'll always be a decision with large pharma? If I'm only doing two batches a year, and even the life cycle dependency of the thing, you're not going to implement. You may choose not to implement an MES. Now, granted, over time, you may end up getting there, but won't that always be to some degree?
I think and that's why I didn't say we want to make it 100%.
Okay.
There will be exceptions. I think on the small side, people think, well, they're in clinical, so they don't really want to do that. It's too early. Paper is easier. And what we've seen is the companies that are going into clinical to raise a lot of money, they're more valuable. They perceive themselves to be more valuable if they're digital. And so the ones that are thinking ahead are. And then in response to yours, I only do that twice a year. Maybe I only do 2 production. Well, is it similar to something I do? Because it might be a really small change or tweak to something that you do monthly. So
No, thanks.
the
Good
best
point.
answer is it probably depends. But there, I do agree, there will be paper for a long time. Let's get it down to 20% paper.
Gotcha. Anyone else?
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Brian.